Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, as Ukraine more new frontline update for the 19th of March 2024. Hope you didn't miss me too much. It's been a long time, right? If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. JR has done the mapping update again. What a legend. We are going to just pop to the northern border areas of Ukraine, sort of the Kursk and the Belgorod Oblast, particularly Belgorod, where it seems to still be fairly active. There are strikes, air raids going on Belgorod. Strikes, I don't know if they're on Belgorod, but things fall in Belgorod, as I've said before. Air defences in Belgorod are active. I think the Russians have their air defences inside the city limits, and therefore when they're shooting rockets down that are going over or near Belgorod, that they have a tendency to fall or can fall into Belgorod. And we have evidence of that, but I don't know whether the Ukrainians or the pro-Ukrainian Russians, the Free Russian fighters, are firing things into Belgorod. It's just really unclear at the moment. And I've been saying I'm just not sure what's going on. And by that I mean, what are the exact intentions of the Free Russia fighters? And how successful are they being? And are there any ramifications that, you know, the law of unintended consequences, so that the Russians have been retaliating by absolutely flattening certain areas on the border, villages and what have you, that have been annoying, I think, some of the Ukrainians on the border. The Ukrainian forces have had to pull back due to intensified attacks along the border. So, you know, there are some who think this is not a good idea for the Free Russia fighters to be doing that, and others that think it is. So it is, I guess, in the balance to some degree. Well, some things have come out today that give us an idea of what's going on. In a few quotes, in a few weeks, Putin will have to transfer troops from the front to protect the borders if the operation to break through the border of the Russian Federation by Russian volunteers continues at this pace. That's the Deputy Commander of the Freedom of Russia Legion, Caesar. So that is exactly what I've been talking about, which is, okay, what are the Russians going to do? Are they going to have to pull resources, air defences, equipment to this area? And that surely has got to be one of the intentions for these attacks. Quote, the enemy suffered huge losses, about 1,500 personnel, dozens of equipment and weapons. The enemy is forced to transfer all kinds of units, including elite units, to our areas. And that's coming from the Legion Freedom of Russia again. So that there are these claims of doing some significant damage to the Russians and either attracting the Russians, fixing the Russians there now, or intending to do so going forward. There's a useful analysis here from PS01. I don't know if it's entirely from him. There's a quote here. I don't know how long the quote is. It's the entire actually post is from a Telegram source. So take everything with a pinch of salt, of course. So, Kozinka, Belgorod region, the death of the colonel's son and unsuccessful attempts to recapture the border village. The events described below it took place in the village. Kozinka, Gravoronsky district, Belgorod region. The village is located on the border of the Belgorod and Sumy regions. Okay, let's go and look at that. There's Grivoron there. And we have this village that is under Ukrainian control, as according to Andrew Perpetua, or at least, sorry, partly under Ukrainian control, just at the very border area of it. That's according to Andrew Perpetua, but not Surat maps. And Deep State has sort of grey zone and whatnot going on, I believe. So to continue, and I'm not sure what is meant here by the death of the colonel's son. Is that the Russian colonel's son? Who knows? Or the colonel associated with the Free Russia units. As you know, fighting for this territory has been going on for a week now. So that tells you something. This is a much more considerable attempt at going across the border that doesn't look like just a little raid that we have seen previously from these same units. The Russian armed forces are trying to drive out the enemy troops that have entered there from the village. In addition to the border service of the FSB of the Russian Federation, units of the 49th Combined Arms Army are also responsible for guarding the sections of the border. The main forces of the army are concentrated in the Kherson direction. Part of the reserve is located here, the lucky ones who did not end up in the Oleshki-Kakovka section. And then from the 15th of March in Kozinka, a Ukrainian Patriot car with servicemen of 49th OA was ambushed. The car was shot by the commander of the So I take it this is then a Russian source saying all this. The car was shot by a commander of the RDK, so that's the Russian Volunteer Corps. In the car were Kolotiev Alexei Olegovich, who's a senior lieutenant, Romanovich, a lieutenant, and Stanislavovich, a junior sergeant. Bezmertny and Shorikov died on the spot. Kolotov was wounded and captured. According to available information, he has now been taken to the territory of Ukraine. Particular attention should be paid to Lieutenant Nikita Bezmertny. Initially, the officer was supposed to serve as part of the 32nd Engineer Regiment in the Kherson direction. However, under the patronage of his father, so this is a Russian colonel's son, he was transferred to the safer Belgorod region, of course. This is what happens when your father is the head of the army engineering troops. Colonel Bezmertny Roman Vasilievich. Meanwhile, units of the Russian armed forces are trying to oust the RDK forces with artillery attacks and visits by small mobile groups of special forces. So Spetsnaz appeared to be involved, as according to this Russian source. And then one of these attempts occurred yesterday, so that's on the 18th. That is yesterday from today, so this is written today. A group of the 2nd Separate Special Purpose Brigade Military Unit 64044 Skov, consisting of 10 people entering into battle with the RDK unit. Subsequently, the group of the 2nd Regiment had to withdraw. In the group, Lieutenant Group Commander wounded, evacuated, a senior sergeant died, a warrant officer died, a corporal wounded, evacuated, corporal wounded, evacuated, private wounded, evacuated. The fighting for the village continues. So this is all small level stuff. But you can see that there is a lot of activity going on, at least in some of these places. Still unsure, really, of the overall intention. I mean, it really has to be forcing the Russians' hand here, forcing them to move troops to the area, because there is no way that a number of small number of probably relatively small units are going to take vast swathes of Russian territory. That's not going to happen. They're not going to march on Moscow. They're not going to march on Belgorod. But they are going to cause the Russians a bit of a headache and cause them to move troops and equipment to the area. So that has to be the main intention. The question is, will it be worth it? Is it currently worth it? And that's an open question. Right, when we come to the more established front lines, the northeastern axis from Kupiansk here to Svatova to Crimea, we can see that there are some small gains here for the Russians around Tabaivka. Indeed, Suryat Maps has a claim concerning this, which is situation on northeastern front. Russian army made minimal advances northeast of Tabaivka towards the main Ukrainian trench in this direction. The situation around that village is complicated for Russian forces, as the Ukrainian army still is in control over the western hills. Of course, I have to say yet again, well, actually, this is an agreed upon bit of mapping. So actually, I won't say what I was going to say, but here it looks one of those rare occasions where the other mappers had the Russians further forward before Suryat Maps caught up, and so I doubt that's an advance that took place in the last 24 hours, but is more likely just a bit of evidence that has given Suryat Maps the justification for moving the Russian force control line further to the northwest there. As we come further down, no changes to the front line around Terny, Torska, Bilorivka, Seversk front line. Bakhmut again, my goodness, is this over a week of no changes to Bakhmut? Broadly speaking, at least minimal changes. This is really good news for the Ukrainians. That Ivanivska has not shifted in control, I think it is really significant. And then when we come down to Avdiivka, we have this gain for, and the tweets were shown yesterday. I showed you those tweets yesterday. In fact, I can show you them again today. I haven't brought them up here because I read this to you yesterday. So there's some gains there for the Ukrainians as they're pushing the Russians back, and the day before that was marked by Andrew Perpetua's map and Deep State map as well. So Suryat Map's a little bit slower, but it is showing that the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back there, which, as I said yesterday, is really significant because this is the way that the Russians would unseat the Ukrainians from the whole area, in my opinion. Rather than push across this river and the lakes that are along it and onto the higher ground here, it's much more sensible to go up the railway and then come down from the north and kind of bypass the river really and attack the Ukrainians from there. So the Ukrainians would no doubt realize that and are working to push the Russians back there so that they don't have the opportunity to do that. Meanwhile, the Russians are pushing closer to the river, and this was always going to happen. The question is what happens when they get to the river, and I assume that the Ukrainians will be able to keep the Russians in place there. I mean, it's not going to be the biggest obstacle. There is just, you know, as you can see, sort of lakes, and joining the lakes there will be small marshy areas and rivers. I presume these are kind of dammed for one reason or another, and it's just not going to be easy, especially as they have to go uphill as they move to the west. So if you see here down at the bottom of the screen, you have the height. So this is 190 meters plus over this side, and then down here you've got 174 meters. So it's not a huge incline, but it is an incline, and it will mean navigating this river area there, so with equipment. And if you're going to do that, you're going to need probably maybe bridging equipment. I don't know how marshy this is and how much of an actual river that may or may not be at this time of year as well. These images look like they're taken at the end of summer, so it's very likely that, you know, at this time of year that may well be much more difficult to navigate with equipment. And so we go back to this idea that really they've got to come in from the north. Anyway, we have some gains for the Russians, sorry, in both the Orlivka area, that's this village next to the river, and also Tonyenka further to the south. And that's at least according to Surat maps in Tonyenka. The other mappers don't quite agree yet, at least. But up here in Orlivka, it's a little bit more agreement between them. And the Surat maps claim here is that basically the Russian army took full control over the locality of Orlivka. So they control, as according to Surat maps, pretty much that whole village and the environs. So there is still grinding to be done around Avdiivka, but it's not like we saw sort of a month ago where the Russians were making quicker gains, more substantial gains. And again, just Krasnohorivka, Mariinka, Pobieda, Novomokhilivka down here, we have no change. I can't tell you how significant that is in my eyes. So again, we're talking, I mean, I keep talking about the Russians culminating. They could well be culminating, and March 17th has been and gone. The elections have been and gone. That push to gain some big victory before the election never really materialized. They got Avdiivka, but they kind of took Avdiivka a bit before the elections. So it wasn't like that kind of building up. It wasn't timed perfectly. But I guess, you know, Putin had that to shout about, but you didn't hear much shouting about the successes on the front line in Ukraine, because really there aren't huge successes. The Russians have been attacking, they've been moving forward, but it's come at a huge cost, one assumes, to the Russians. Not just assuming, I mean, we've seen huge vehicle losses around all the places I've just been talking about. Now, as we come down here, I don't have a tweet for this, which is not unusual. Surat map seems to not talk so much about the Ukrainian gains. This could be a rejig. I don't know, to be honest. But anyway, around, where are we really? What's the next biggest place to hear? Halaipale. Okay, so you got Halaipale, Marfapil, and then on towards the Velika Novosilka salient here, where you've got Priutne over here. And anyway, the Ukrainians appear to have made some fairly substantial gains. But we'll see whether that's reflected in Andrew Perpetua's mapping in the coming days, or whether that's just a rejig. I'm not sure of the details there without any further information from Surat maps. And then we have some closing up of this area around Verbove, with deep state maps moving their lines closer to what actually Andrew Perpetua already had, and closer to Surat maps. Surat maps has the entire Surovikin line under Russian control. The other mappers have part of it, a very small part, still a grey zone, and that's the tank ditch and the Dragon's Teeth there. So there's still a bit of contention possibly over that, but I'm sure the Ukrainians aren't long for there, to be honest. It looks like the writing's on the wall, but they are still holding on mainly to this salient, and they're making the Russians really, really fight for it. And then when we come out of there, we go to Krinky and see no change to the maps along the Dnipro River line. But I will refer you to what I thought was a very interesting video last night on Times Radio. Now, Brandon Mitchell, so here he does admit that his information is coming from two sources, and he said this on another post of his, that it came from his friend, the former commander of the 35th. He's a medic, Brandon Mitchell, combat medic, but yeah, his former battalion commander, and from a drone operator that he knows. And the information he provided in this was very interesting. The other guy that talks here talks about how Krinky could be useful if they're going to do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to do what he said was plausible, not without a huge amount of boots on the ground and equipment to be able to challenge. What he did say that I thought was fairly useful is you need a sort of 25 kilometer. Let's see that in terms of Krinky. So how big's that? So that's a 45 kilometer length. So he said, look, if you're going to cross seriously, you're going to need a sort of 25 kilometer length. I don't know if he was talking miles. That'd be something like that, right? That if you fully control that on the left bank, so the Ukrainians would have to expand their control from Kazachi Lahiri all the way up to Nipriani in order to put pontoon bridges or ferries or whatever, however they're going to get equipment across there. You need to give yourself a much bigger section of controlled river, but on both sides, in order to keep the enemy guessing at exactly where you're going to cross and do it very quickly, and have electronic warfare operating and drone superiority there. Because basically you can't do that with just controlling Krinky, because the Russians know where you're going to put your equipment across. That equipment has to get to Krinky, right? Because you don't solidly control anywhere else along the river. So the Russians can stop the Ukrainians from effectively putting anything across the river in terms of equipment. You start controlling more of it, then it's like a snowball effect after that. However, I don't know that Ukraine have the ability to remotely consider this. They're not going to have control of the river, anything like this, not for some while. And it is challenging because you can't get control of that amount of the river without equipment, and you can't get equipment across without that control of the river. So it's this real bind that they're in. Anyway, Brandon Mitchell here talks about what's going on in Krinky right now.
The information I can give you is, as of yesterday, from my former commander at battalion level, and one of my friends, a Scouser drone operator in one of the territorial regiments, who's quite handy. Dachi is held, which is across from Antonivka. That is completely held. And at a soldier-to-soldier level, there's rumors that we're making success in Oleshki city proper. But I can't confirm that, and I don't know that. But if that is true, that makes me happy. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Krinky is held. How we infiltrate, I have no experience. I've not been on the other side. But in the month of September, October, and November, we paid very dearly for that. We had high casualties. When we had our most single success I've seen, at the end of November, early December, there was a snowstorm. Very heavy snowstorm for 3 days. Odessa was blocked. Everything was blocked. Perhaps, I believe, forward artillery observers do not exist anymore. It's all conducted by drones. Matrice drones are very effective, very expensive. We've fundraised for Mavic drones. But during this heavy snowstorm, our Marines, I suspect our SSO units, although I don't know, they got very busy. And some of our best kills of this whole bridgehead that everyone talks about were achieved. There was perhaps the equivalent of a battalion slaughtered, Russian battalion slaughtered during the snowstorm. That's why Krinky is secure. That's a big contribution to why Dachi has gone the way it has. It's very, very dangerous. Antonivka is the most dangerous place on Kherson City side, on our side. But that just goes to show what our infantry can do when their artillery cannot work. Hence we go back, well, we can talk more about that later, what we actually need.
Yeah, and it goes back to you stop the Russian artillery from working. You are able to do all sorts of stuff. So the counter battery fire is incredibly important, and the ability for drones to fly further and hit harder on things like artillery, incredibly important. So interesting to hear that Dachi is. I mean, that has popped up in the sort of in the socials over the last week. It's been mentioned where it hasn't been previously, and indeed in the ISW reports. And also, I don't know, I mean, he said, take it with a pinch of salt, but person-to-person fighting maybe in Oleshki, which, wow, I mean, I guess there's quite a large area here to try and do some special forces infiltration. So quite possibly there. And then Krinky still holds. But again, what's the intention for Krinky going forward? Can they still maintain that ratio of attrition of Russian forces and equipment by sacrificing the people in Krinky? I don't know. We'll keep an eye on it. But anyway, that's a Frontline update for today. Hopefully that was useful for you. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. I've got a couple of lives coming up Thursday, sort of lunchtime UK time. I'll be speaking to someone about kicking the Russians out of the UN Security Council. So one of the viewers that you guys will know from interaction on the threads, he's going to talk about that area of his expertise. He's done a lot of research on that. And then on Friday, about 3 o'clock UK time, I'm going to speak again. I first spoke to her back much further at the beginning of the war, Anastasia Paraskova, who is fantastic. She was really great guest, and she at the time was living in Kharkiv. I don't even know where she is based at the moment. I presume still there. She was heavily involved in fundraising and supporting the troops and whatnot from living in Kharkiv. So I'm going to speak to her, see how she's getting on, and get a sense of what at least anecdotally what the public opinion is on certain things. So look forward to both of those lives. Come and join us. Anyway, in the meantime, take care. Speak to you soon.